Greetings and durud. Welcome to today's latest episode of the Iranian Studies Initiative lectures in collaboration with the University of California, Santa Barbara. I am Ali Reza Ardekani of Farhang Foundation. We are a 100% member-supported, non-political, non-religious, and not-for-profit organization with the sole mission to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture for the benefit of the global community. Today, we are honored to welcome back to our platform Dr. Pamela Karimi from Cornell University for Women, Art, Freedom, Artists and Street Politics in Iran. This series is made possible with the generous support of the Geramian Emrani Foundation. Please note that we will be holding a Q&A session at the end of today's talk. So please do submit your questions for Dr. Karimi via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now it is my pleasure to welcome today's moderator, Dr. Farshad Somboldel, World History and Cultures Librarian at the University of California, San Diego.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us again for this exciting talk from one of the most inspiring scholars of the field. In my view, at least, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Pamela Karimi today with us. I'm very excited for the talk. I'm fascinated by her work. Let me just quickly introduce Dr. Karimi. Pamela Karimi is an associate professor of history of art and architecture at Cornell University. Her expertise lies primarily in the art, architecture, and visual culture of the modern and contemporary Middle East. She is the author of Domesticity and Consumer Culture in Iran, Interior Revolutions of the Modern Era, which is actually translated and published by Shiraz Press in Tehran, also in 2021. Her second book is Alternative Iran, Contemporary Art and Critical Spiritual Practice, published in 2022. And the last book published by this scholar is Women, Art, Freedom, Artists, and Street Politics in Iran, which is the subject of this talk today. Thank you, and please join me welcoming Dr. Pamela Karimi. Pamela Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Farshad Aziz and Ali Reza, for that very kind introduction. The Woman Life Freedom Uprising stands apart from every earlier movement in modern Iranian history, not only for its feminist pulse and the extraordinary courage of its young people, nor simply for its success in boldly and largely securing women's freedom of choice over veiling, but for the sheer intensity of the art it unleashed. My book begins with that visual and artistic burst. The death of Jina Mahsa Amini in September of 2022, after her arrest by the morality police, triggered an outpouring of protest that was at once political, poetic, and profoundly aesthetic. The first image we saw was her hospital photograph, a young woman lying unconscious, punished for showing a strand of hair. Within hours, that image was transformed, redrawn, remixed, animated, song. Artists from across Iran and diaspora began to respond with a speed and eloquence that no state could suppress. Much of this art traveled through social media, but my book turns to those artists working inside Iran who carried their craft into the streets, often at great personal risk. Their work shows how art in times of crisis becomes not a mirror, but an instrument, a way of thinking, organizing, and even surviving. I describe this body of work as parafeminist, borrowing a term from the art historian Amelia Jones. It starts from women's liberation, but expands to include class, ethnicity, religion, and the realities of everyday life. It also challenges Western assumptions about feminist art by highlighting a wide range of markers, women and men, secular and religious, famous and anonymous, whose actions resist simple labels like veiled, unveiled, or public and private. Through interviews with artists, curators, students, and teachers, I show how years of training in sculpture, choreography, and design shaped these acts of resistance, how a manifesto could be danced, whispered, or welded, and how streets became a shared arena of defiance. My book is not a catalog of protest images. It is a study of artistic agency. It asks how creativity survives under authoritarian rule, how aesthetic imagination becomes a form of collective speech, and how in Iran today, art keeps the catchphrase, women, life, freedom, alive, not just as a slogan, but as a continuing cultural rhythm, a living argument about what it means to see, to act, and to be free. In this book, I also trace how the body, especially the female body, becomes such a central tool in Iranian art today. I look back at its early uses, the limitations artists faced, and how those histories shaped the bold body-based art that we see today. After the 1979 revolution, Iranian art schools adopted Bauhaus-inspired methods, abstract forms, simplified shapes, vibrant colors, and sensory exercises as a way to avoid politically dangerous content. Johannes Eaton's teachings, including blindfolded texture studies, became central to the curriculum, encouraging students to focus on perception and material experience rather than explicit themes. This emphasis on sensing body shaped a generation of artists in Iran, but it contrasted sharply with diasporic work, such as, for example, Shirin Neshat's Women of Allah, which used the female body as a direct political battlefield. Inside Iran, censorship forced a different feminist language to emerge, one that often diverges from or even pushes against the strategies of well-known artists abroad. When the uprising began, it coincided with the publication of this book, a project that had immersed me in underground art practices in Iran, works made in apartments, dilapidated buildings, remote areas, including caves, and semi-private and private spaces, what came to label artistic genres such as théâtre appartemانی or apartment theater. What set women, life, freedom apart was its fearless move into the streets, art made in public, at a scale in full view. Early on, I struggled to reach artists and worried that publishers wouldn't reproduce colored images of their work. So with help from artists here, I created hundreds of these images. In the end, thanks to the courage and openness of the artists and a generous grant from the Persian Heritage Foundation, I was able to produce a book exactly as I had hoped. In this presentation, I introduce the work of Iranian artists, especially those creating at the height of the uprising. Through the structure of my book, which is organized not into chapters, but into acts, like a play, these acts unfold one after another, never signaling a final conclusion. Each remains open-ended, mirroring the unfinished nature of the movement itself. The acts are organized thematically, reflecting the ideas and emotions that shaped artistic production inside Iran during and in the immediate aftermath of the uprising. In the decade after the Iran-Iraq War, a careful but important form of feminism began to grow inside Iran and eventually beyond the Islamic Republic's own frameworks. Government-run women's magazines and officials started speaking about women's rights through an Islamic lens. This so-called Islamic feminism, though debated, opened the door to wider conversations. Reforms under President Khatami and the rise of secular activists and artists. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, women across law, media, and the arts were pushing against long-standing restrictions. These efforts laid the foundations for the more radical street-based feminist actions that would later shape the art of the woman, life, freedom uprising. If Hannah Arendt gives us the idea of the space of appearance, in Iran, the sidewalk becomes its most powerful stage. Think of Women in Red, 74 women standing in Ferdowsi Square in 2011, drawing a mythic memory of the city captured in Khosrow Sinai's documentary about Tehran just before the revolution into the present and insisting that presence itself can be a public monument. Or Jinus Taghizade's walk while reading Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, filmed on a GoPro as she moved past sites of state violence, from Evin prison to Lot 41 in Behesht Zahra, which is a mass grave of political activists, showing how a female voice on foot can redraw the city's map of fear. During the uprising, this body as a banner became even more urgent. The anonymous handmaid near Azadi Tower used dystopian fiction as a shield and a complaint. Zohre Solati's mirror suit, called This Is Who I Am, turned the male gaze back onto the city as she crossed Shariati Street, the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art grounds, and the conservative Tehran Sar neighborhood. And in religious city of Mashhad, Nasrin Shahbegi's rolling performance called The Cry of the Body claimed movement itself as a form of resistance. All of this grows from earlier practices. Recall Mehrane Atashi, or Chupan, now she's called by the tag name Chupan, self-portraits inside the 2009 Green Movement marches, images that led to her arrest and even imprisonment at Evin. Here, the camera is not an outside observer, but a politicized participant. Across these works, the parade, the quote-unquote parade, becomes a method, a feminist practice of appearing, lingering, and rerouting every movement so that the right to the city is argued not in text, but in the rhythm of the body, in the rhythm of footsteps. If the parading body asserts visibility, the hidden body wields what Edward Glissant calls the power of opacity, the right to remain unseen, unreadable, and therefore ungovernable. Across the woman life freedom uprising, strategies of concealment, masking, animizing, blurring, veiling turned evasion into a new feminist syntax of defiance. In Daneshju Park in October 2022, two unidentified women hung red nooses from trees, their authorship erased, but their gesture unmistakable. A spectral warning made all the louder by its disappearance. The anonymous performance by Soheila Golestani and Hamid Pourazari in a Tehran park, standing on bail in silence before their arrests, was soon reenacted by others whose faces were wrapped in blood-stained bandages, transforming absence into collective visibility. Online, the graphic designer Meysam Alavde is his tag name again, turned Persian calligraphy into an encrypted visual code. His hijab becomes hobab or bubbles. His typography dissolves meaning as it repeats with his redesign of University of the Art logo inserts negation. These typographic ghosts broadcast dissent without a signature. In photographic practice, Sara Sassani's series, We Are Born Too Late, literalizes invisibility. Women draped in white masks stand motionless amid the blare of Tehran bazaar crowds, or a female DJ performs faceless behind her turntable. In her later project, In Death of the Day from 2020-2021, women and their allegorical graves stand facing the sea, anonymous yet undiminished, created partly before the uprising, but exhibited during the Darzi's Perspuk Festival of the Arts, which was appropriately focused on the theme of the body at the height of the uprising. These works framed opacity not as withdrawal, but as a power mode, as a powerful mode of endurance. If the body on parade is one feminist tactique, the prop on the pavement is its counterpart. By the way, these are familiar images from other forms of protest elsewhere around the world, including the US and Hong Kong. Objects that turn sidewalks into stages and passers-by into witnesses. Since Vida Mobahed's 2017 stand on Enqilab Street with her white scarf held high, this scarf, a strand of hair, a shoe, or even a sanitary pad gained agency during the uprising. These small objects could move crowds, disrupt surveillance, and pierce everyday routines. They work because they link the intimate to the public. A headscarf becomes a banner, hers becomes a standard. A menstrual pad becomes a blindfold for a security camera. Even before 2022, artists were rehearsing this language of street props. Nastaran Safai's lacquered red shoe turned a lure and injury into a monument. Tehran Carnival, which is a group of young artists back then from 2009 roughly to 2012, roadside urban greenhouse planted oversized red roses that could also suggest female reproductive organs in an urban zone highly surveyed by the government. During the uprising, activists covered metro CCTVs with pads that opened like flowers. Mansoure Bagharai's hair-winged mantle made both flight and estrangement visible, a surreal hinge between liberation and the authorities' gaze. These objects don't just represent politics, they perform it. They interrupt the police gaze, mark wounds, and shift authorship from the artist to anyone who looks, photographs, or picks up a prop and walks on. In this sense, the prop is not a decoration, but a force. The woman life freedom uprising operated less through rapture than through remix. Artists and activists reclaimed older Iranian and global protest vocabularies and made them act in the present. Through appropriation, adaptation, and pastiche, the 1979 women's marches in Tehran and the 1979 revolutionary posters themselves, inspired by the May 1968 student protests in Paris, resurfaced in the feminist street lexicon. We had seen this even years before in Farideh Lashai's Le Temps Perdu, where Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe fades into an image of badly veiled Tehran youth. And by badly veiled, of course, I'm literally translating bad hijab, turning art history into a covert language of critique. Likewise, the reuse of the little blackfish imagery fuses 1960s leftist allegory with 2020's protest urgency. Even the color red, long monopolized by the state as a symbol of martyrdom, is reactivated. Blood-tinted fountains, mirror stencils in universities, reading, "This is the face of someone who can make a change," and Zohre Solati's crimson body performance. They all transform official martyr iconography into a people's ledger of loss and defiance. Finally, the Charlie Hebdo Khamenei banner hung over Tehran's Hemmat Expressway exemplifies how parody itself has become a medium of courage, the female body now occupying the place of risk once reserved for ideology. Taken together, these examples reveal a present tense aesthetics of survival that redistributes authorship from state to the street, allowing old signs to do radically new political work. What if remembering could itself be an act of movement? I focus here on reenactment as a street tactic that turns memory into motion. When Iranian women cut their hair, a mourning ritual which became a global gesture, echoed in solidarity videos from across the world, we saw a form of reenactment. Shortly after, students adopted the Khodanur Lojei's pose, honoring the Baluchi protester killed in Zahedan. Reenactment reframes history for the present. Think of Jeremy Deller's 2001 project that reenacted an uprising from the time of the conservative government of Margaret Thatcher. But in Iran, it also revives the legacy of Taziyeh passion plays as a secular, site-specific dissent. This logic of embodied memory is nowhere clearer than in evolving work of Tanin Torabi, a choreographer and filmmaker who has made the one-take filmmaking technique her method of risk. Some of you might be familiar with the movie Russian Art. This is the film that uses, I believe for the first time, the one-take filmmaking technique. So Tanin does the same in her films. In her early short film, Daghiv, from 2017, Torabi moves alone through Tehran's Tajrish Bazaar, testing how a woman's body can misuse a tightly surveyed marketplace. And I mean misuse in quotation mark. The single continuous shot transforms startled onlookers into unwitting performers. 4 years later, in plain sight from 2021 during COVID, she expands the experiment to Keshavarz Boulevard, where 3 masked women walk the traffic median, syncing small, precise gestures to the city's pulse while evading surveillance. Again, the camera never cuts, turning the sidewalk itself into a living stage and a score. Through Until, which was filmed in 2023 during the height of the Woman Life Freedom Uprising, so this is the winter of 2023, Torabi's language of movement becomes a direct reenactment of protest itself. Shot entirely on a phone and passed hand to hand, the camera follows performers as they sprint, hide, regather, and burst into brief dance. We glimpse Enqilab and Vesal streets, Vida Movahed's utility box, a glass boss shelter graffitied Women Life Freedom, and the faint traces of paint being scrubbed away, history literally slipping in and out of the frame. Across these works, the one take becomes an aesthetic of presence. No montage to soften danger, no second chances, only the real time of the street. Torabi's films don't imitate protest, they rehearse it. Each performance teaches courage through motion, turning Tehran itself into an actor rather than a backdrop. Here I frame documenting urban unrest as a vernacular cinema that turns witness into authors. As Peter Snowden, who has written extensively about the use of social media and video during the Arab Spring, argues, phone videos don't just record events, they catalyze them. Sensory, shaking, breath in the mic evidence that collapse distance. We see this grammar in Iran. In the midst of the uprising, Parastu Furuhar transformed her parents' house into a counter archive. Dead magnolia tree planted by her mother, Parvaneh Furuhar, dressed with women, life, freedom. A memorial within a memorial. Mona Sartove's images of morality police officers firing indiscriminately at cars carrying unveiled women map state violence onto the fabric of everyday streets. Her brave act of documenting these moments put her life in danger and ultimately forced her and her husband to leave Iran. On Instagram, Meysam Azarzad fused Shahnameh couplets with portraits of those fallen or injured, Nika, Elahe Tawakkolian's blinded eye, backs scarred with pellets, sprouting tulips, turning casualties into national memory. I frame this section as camouflaging defiant words, how language breaks, fragments, and recombines to carry what ordinary speech cannot. Between September 2022 and March of 2023, Iran lived in a state of collective grief. Parents, students, workers, and even poets fell out of breath, out of words. Fatemeh Shams responded to this speechlessness by unmaking a poem. Her installation, This Is Not a Poem, created with Ilya Musavi at Ohio State, turned collapse into form, each letter carved in wood and stained in red, fragments hanging from the ceiling like suspended bodies, an environment where reading felt like not reading. From here, I shift to Tehran's vernacular avant-garde group, Matrud, which literally means rejected. This is a group that pushes back against what they call sublime aesthetic poetry, and they give this criticism even to oppositional poetry of Iran. They ground their work in the city's everyday spaces instead. Ali Sadvati Qal'eh's South Tehran roots shaped their idea of geography of expression. Writing formed by cafes, alleys, and cultural houses built after the Iran-Iraq War. Their quote-unquote heated expressions appear in poetry jams or she'r ijra and urban interventions. Hamid Jaberha hand-pastes banned poems as do-it-yourself bride sites onto city walls, while Ali Reza Mohammadi, another member of the group, photographed each night's erasure of political graffiti, documenting a running dialogue between paint and power. At the height of the uprising, when most university art classes were shut down, the group's covert atelier on the upper edge of the Jamshidiyeh Park became both a rehearsal space and a refuge. This was just an empty space that they occupied. In other words, they did not have permission from anyone. A place where students, artists, and poets gathered to create improvised installations. Samira Yahyai, one of the collaborators of Matrud, carried this praxis into Kashan's Vayu residency, reciting improvised verses in an empty courtyard pool. She invited her audiences to offer words, beginning simply with the word woman. The collective poem built as each participant added a line. The atmosphere shifted from lyric to incitement as the voices rose towards a powerful crescendo, with Yahyai standing amid the stone pin portraits of dead people. In the book, I place the lineage of this kind of performative poetry or poetry jamming or she'r ijra beside earlier Iranian experiments, such as Tondar Kia's 1939 to 1940 visual sonic concrete page of the clock and Reza Barahani's phonetic drum of death, works meant to be performed, not just read. Matrud names this tactique of borrowing from the past reverse appropriation. And in doing so, they refuse what they call the luxury objects of books and magazines. This reverse appropriation also alludes to the work of censors. Even censors sometimes deform rather than erase the words zan or azadi, leaving stretched letters that betray a reluctant reverence. The arc from Fatemeh Shams' carved letters to Matrud's self-defined weak poetry or Sher Zaif shows how, when a speech is police, form does the shouting. For many progressive thinkers trained within post-colonial frameworks that privilege cultural relativism, the sight of Iranian women setting fire to their veils possessed an ethical dilemma: how to reconcile solidarity with respect for faith of some people around the world. At the height of the uprising, the imprisoned journalist Bahare Hedayat exposed this contradiction most sharply, arguing that to call opposition to compulsory hijab Islamophobia denies Middle Eastern women the right to lament their own oppression. Her voice, coming from Evin prison, reframed dissent not as an attack on Islam, but as resistance to its political instrumentalization. This tension surfaced dramatically in 2023 at MacAllister College's Art Gallery, where Iranian American artist Tarabat Talebhasand retrospective featuring pieces from her Blasphemy series inspired by Roxana Shirazi's memoir, The Last Living Slut Made in Iran, bred backstage, was paused after protests by Muslim students who otherwise supported the movement in Iran. The exhibition exploring sexuality, diaspora trauma, and the veil's politicization was misread by the school's authority as mockery rather than as a mediation on coercion and desire. The gallery's glass walls were literally shuttered in black curtains, a visual metaphor for the very censorship the work sought to expose. Inside Iran, however, the discourse was far more complex. Veiled artists and believers were themselves creating some of the most potent critiques of compulsion in veiling. Nadastan magazine's 2022 Women issue, with its cover image of a woman's unbound hair, a photograph which was taken by Mehri Rahimzadeh, prompted an interrogation by the state censors. Veiled and devout, Rahimzadeh declared, quote, "My Islam is for my own peace, not for others." Her earlier photographic series, Living with Blindfolded Eyes from 2011, prefigured the current generation's awakening. Portraits of women blindfolded under the weight of unseen authority. Today, however, Rahimzadeh noted, these same women would appear eyes open, facing the camera without fear. Masumeh Mohtadi, by contrast, channeled her personal trauma from police violence at Tehran's House of the Artist, or Khaneh Honarmandan, into her installation, The Sleep of Reason. Suspended Quranic folios from Surah 256, which is called Let There Be No Compulsion in Religion, are interlaced with Goya's grotesque and strands of synthetic black hair, the movement's politicized material. Displayed quietly at a prominent gallery in Tehran, the piece transforms the scripture into a site of accountability, asserting that faith itself condemns coercion. Beyond the frame of religion, performance artist Mohsen Jamalnik literalized his critique by donning a headscarf and driving through Tehran's CCTV monitored streets to expose the absurdity of gendered surveillance. His act updated the 2009 Green Movement solidarity selfies of men in chadors who turned online protest into embodied everyday defiance. These gestures together show that resistance in Iran spans the devout and the secular, the unveiled and the unveiled and the veiled. Theoretically, this landscape asks viewers to reconsider agency itself. Sara Ahmed's notion of staying uncomfortable with feminism reminds us that solidarity requires unease. Acts of burning veils or tossing turbans, often dismissed as Islamophobic by some or excessive, became in this light heightened expressions that keep revolt alive. In Iran's recent cultural battles, artists have been opposing art with art in the city itself, answering sanctioned spectacle with agile, site-specific counterworks that jam official narratives and reprogram how bodies move through public spaces. Rooted in situationist tactics or détournement, parody, and the tactical misuse of symbols, this insurgent practice expanded first under President Rouhani's quote-unquote soft control era, where TV talent shows and sprawling Fajr festivals normalized the state-approved aesthetics. Artists replied in kind. At a 2018 Fajr 40th anniversary, Homayun Sirizi hacked the festivities by distributing airline sick bags stamped for vomit for reconciliation, complete with safety cards for navigating a nauseating art scene, an elegant détournement of festival hospitality into embodied critique. The mood hardened in 2021 when the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance new minister published a program to quote-unquote Islamicize the arts of Iran, vilifying galleries and prescribing a pivot from conceptual practice to handicrafts. Artists answered by ignoring permits, exhibiting long-suppressed works inside Iran's public spaces. As the Woman Life Freedom Uprising halted, the commercial art calendar, arrests multiplied, and artists escalated boycotts. Filmmaker Mania Haqiqi's viral refusal framed the Fajr participation as complicity with a regime that jails directors and shoots out protesters' eyes, and ethics of non-exhibition as artistic act it was, that is to say, the gesture of Mania Haqiqi. On the ground, Tehran's University of Art became a laboratory for art against art. Sculpture chair Korush Golnari, later suspended for supporting his students during the uprising, had already moved the sculpture off the pedestals and into social practice. His student Mohsen Rafi'i staged kinetic, disorienting sculptures that re-educate the body. His Jabeja sculpture, made in 2019, a 13-meter seesaw bench, came alive only when students of mixed genders sat on it together and they started laughing and communicating. Administrators of the university obviously did not like this, so they removed the bench under cover of the night, dumping it into a landfill. Then students turned the seizure itself into a citywide performance about control on the eve of the uprising. Artists like Rafi'i, and by the way, the image to the right, it is another one of his kinetic sculptures installed on a sidewalk and inspired by the very electrical box on which the girls of the revolution once stood, show how people move, listen, and use public space. They disrupt the stage on which official art usually operates. In a city filled with state propaganda, they introduce new ways of sitting, gathering, walking, and crossing thresholds. Their work is a kind of living handbook for culture jamming in Iran, showing how small, improvised actions can challenge monumental propaganda. In January 2024, Tehran-based artist Mojtaba Amini opened an exhibition at O Gallery titled "Not Everyone Will Be Taken into the Future." Borrowing its name from Ilya Kabakov, the famous Russian artist. But Amini used this reference to quietly stage a memorial to the young people killed in the uprising. Inside, viewers faced tar black and crimson casts of young bodies and paintings of women crouching in green field, looking upward as if asking, "Now what?" The show turned mourning into a direct challenge. Those excluded from the future now confront the nation's conscience. Kabakov's text had mocked utopian gatekeeping. Kabakov's art had mocked utopian gatekeeping. Amini turned that art toward a moral question about the artist's own future-making power. Should art retreat, despair, or act? He leaves that unanswered, compelling us to think about how art, when official politics are sealed off, can still pre-envision social repair. In this sense, this work parallels with what the historian Sampara Aranke calls death's futurity, how images of the murdered, from Emmett Till to perhaps Jina Mahsa Amini, convert grief into an engine of liberation. That theme of deferral as futurity, of art gesturing forward while made under repression, recurs in the photography of Shiva Khatami, her series called Smarties from 2018 to 2019 captured young women in Tehran with dyed hair, the color of Smarties, which is a favorite candy in Iran, sitting defiantly on sidewalks or standing on sidewalks. Only after the uprising did the images circulate, seemingly prophetic, as if they had waited for history to catch up. Khademi's work transforms documentation into time-release activism, a perfect case of what philosopher Lisa Braister calls to defer is futural. Film too played a part in this delayed prophecy. The viral clip or GIF during the uprising of women shouting "FUCKU" from a car sunroof was actually a scene from Ali Ahmadzadeh's underground film Critical Zone, shot in 2019 and finally released outside of Iran in 2023. Filming without permits, Ahmadzadeh used hidden cameras to turn Tehran's tunnels and taxis into maps of the city's psychological pressure. His protagonist, Amir, who is a driver, moves quietly through this underworld as a driver and witnesses to everyday exhaustion. The film's mood foreshadows the uprising. Exhaustion becomes resistance, and empathy becomes a form of rebellion. This dialogue between mourning and futurity reached its peak in the monumental installation Call Me By My Name at Tehran's Riche 29 Gallery from December 2023 to April of 2024 by filmmaker Mohammad Parvizi, architect Mahsa Masoudi, and actress Pantia Mahdiniya, as well as other collaborators. Spanning 13 meters and rising 8 meters high, it filled a garden with shifting screens showing Mahdiniya's silent face glitching and returning as black-clad performers scrubbed her projected image from the floor. The repeated erasure echoed Tehran's stenciled martyrs, but regenerated them. The heroine here keeps coming back. Masoudi described the space as a rhizome linking memory, city, and the body, while the scaffolding evoked both construction sites and execution platforms. For Parisi, this monumental scale becomes a collective memorial, a place where grief and aesthetics can coexist. The final vignette comes from Bahar Sabet, whose 2023 installation near Evin prison imagined hope through nature. She sealed red bud petals inside straw and mud boxes using the old preservation Iranian method of kangine. The flowers, delicate yet defiantly saved, stand for a future that is delayed but is still alive, like seeds waiting for freer soil. Together, these works form a map of futurity under pressure. They ask us not to remember, but to imagine forward. As the coda of my books shows, life in Iran today holds both deep despair and unexpected pockets of hope. Even as the state intensifies crackdowns, from street surveillance to campaigns such as Noor, artists, designers, filmmakers, and everyday citizens continue to create new spaces of resistance. These remarkable works by Shohreh Mehran, the ones that you're seeing on the screen now, document young Iranian women across her long career. Compare her paintings from 2008 to those from 2023. They reveal a powerful evolution. The latter figures, bruised and beaten, nevertheless struggle to stay upright, capturing both vulnerability and unwavering resistance. Galleries become refuges, clothing becomes a strategy, images become protests, and young women become the face of a future that refuses to disappear. The women life freedom movement may move in waves, but it has already transformed the country's emotional and political landscape. What we see across these acts is not only courage, but imagination, the determination to envision a different Iran long before it becomes possible. And as many artists have told me, even after arrests, fines, or exile, they have not one iota of regret. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. That was a great presentation. We've had actually quite a few questions. I try to combine questions so we can cover as much as we can. But first of all, I want to take the moment to ask my question first, because I have the privilege of having voice here. I'm so sorry, audience, dear audience. I'm gonna ask my question first. Well, my favorite part of your book, as you probably know, is where you basically break the mainstream narrative of bringing an often overlooked and marginalized part of the contemporary performance poetry. So you focused on Matrud and a few other performance poet, as we call them, like Shair Ejrai or Shair Ejra in Persian. But given this powerful intervention, what shape do you anticipate your next research project will take? Like, are you going to continue in your next project to fill this gap of like this marginalized performance poetry or like avant-garde alternative artistic expressions or like poetry creation in Iran? Or this was just this part of the seventh act of this book?
Thank you, Farshad, for that question. As you know, your own scholarship, your own book has inspired me a lot with regard to this chapter of the book in which I talk about the group Matrud. I at the moment, actually, I don't have any plans to expand on this on this research about these alternative groups who quote unquote reject all forms of standard expression. Because I'm working actually on another book project that is mostly about architecture and environmental issues in Iran. And right now, I know that a lot of people are suffering from the climate change and environmental issues and lack of water. And I just wanted to say how much every day I think about Iran and I feel their pain, and it's very sad. But I hope that through our scholarship, through visiting what's happening in Iran, we also can bring some sort of visibility to some of the problems inside that country, whether it's climate related or political. But this group, Farshad, I will probably get back to them because I'm still not done. I feel like I'm not done. They have so much to offer in terms of the connection between the visual arts and poetry. As you know very well, Farshad, Iran is mostly known for its text-based traditions like poetry and literature rather than the visual arts. And so for me, it was a very, very interesting moment to encounter these people who combine poetry with aspects of visual art, because sometimes they rightly so, they think that language is not capable of expressing their thoughts and their ideas in its entirety, and therefore they turn to form. And this mode of expression through quote unquote form uses all kinds of media from the body itself, from letters used as forms rather than as tools that communicate a language. Sometimes they collaborate with visual artists. Sometimes they simply, actually, as Satwati Qaleh kindly shared with me, sometimes they just simply sit in a place all gathered together. They just look at each other and they do nothing. And that itself is also a form of art. Remember John Cage's famous 4 minutes and 33 seconds music in which the orchestra remained completely silent for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. When I talk about John Cage, I don't want to give the impression that these Iranian artists are necessarily inspired by some of these other global trends, because as I mentioned very quickly in my paper, some of the activities are also rooted deeply in Iranian traditions of taziyah performances. The improvised taziyah performances, for example, plays a very important role here. So that's all I can say for now, Farshad, but thank you for that question.
No, thank you. Great. Well, I can talk more on this issue with you and learn a lot, of course, but let me move on to the questions from audience. We are still receiving questions in the Q&A section. I'll make sure that you will receive all the questions after the session, but let me try and combine some of them so we can answer at least a part of the content they were asking us. Well, why are these courageous artistic movements primarily led by female artists? Furthermore, how does your research, particularly through the examples of women asserting agency and power in the book, actively challenge the dominant Western narrative that often frames Iranian women through a lens of the victimhood or something like that? So.
Well, thank you for that question. And by the way, I want to thank our audiences today. I know it's Saturday morning, afternoon, and so you could do all kinds of things today. So I'm very grateful that you're spending time with me today. So thank you for your presence and for your excellent questions. First of all, I want to emphasize that it's not just women who are leading the art scenes. Of course, women play a very important role in that, but men are also equally contributing to a lot of these activities that I tried to showcase in my presentation. There's a lot of collaboration between men and women, and also members of the LGBTQT, and so it's not necessarily women's work, but during the uprising, the message was very clear, and it was I was absolutely inspired by men that I engaged with, because usually it's assumed that Iranian men are still patriarchal. They still carry residues of the past, or some of the, because of some of the, opportunities that this regime has given to men rather than women, that they might actually take advantage of that. But what I saw, at least with the artists that I spoke with, was completely different. First of all, most of the men that I talked to, actually all of them, so they claim that they are feminists, and they are entirely supporting this feminist movement. They're proud of it. They try to collaborate it when and where they could. And so I was really inspired by that. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about one very, very talented artist who contributed a lot to this movement. Today, I didn't talk about him because emotionally it's very hard for me, but he is in the book. Hamed Safai, unfortunately, he took his life last summer. And so I honor him, and I appreciate all those little details that he shared with me about his feelings towards women, people of other sexual orientations. Are really precious words coming from someone who has read so many books of philosophy and so on and so forth, very sophisticated. And I think that we are all sad for his loss, and we miss him tremendously. In terms of the second part of the question about about assumptions in the West about what's going on in Iran, I think that absolutely, especially this movement is turning everything around, including this idea that, Muslim women have their own kind of Islamic feminist ideals, such as, let me wear my scarf and go to the mosque, and that itself gives me freedom. And Iranian women are rejecting that. And this is not to say that they are necessarily interested to level themselves with Western feminism, kind of French feminism and American feminism. They're carving their own way into these complex discourses. And that's why I was inspired to talk to hijabi women in Iran. It's kind of rare to find women who wear the hijab and who stand by the side of the movement, and who are professional artists. It's not rare for hijabi women to stand by other women, but it's kind of rare to have artists being from that group. So I found these artists, and I gave them a voice and a platform in the book, because I think it's very, very important to engage with all kinds of voices in Iran.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. A few other questions are actually going about the intersections and limitations. How do factors like class, ethnicity, religion, geography intersect with gender in this artistic narrative you explore? And given the challenges Iranian women artists face, including censorship, restricted archives, and exile, in some cases, how do these limitations impact your research process? And which groups of women artists do you feel remain underrepresented in the global discussion?
Yeah, of course, every book that is written about the topic of art in Iran can immediately be criticized for its heavy focus on Tehran as opposed to other cities, marginalized areas. where artists obviously exist and they practice their work beautifully so. But you have to understand that I wrote this book in a very, very short time period because obviously I wanted it to be, this was like part of my scholarly activism. I wanted to be relevant. I could wait another, 4 or 5 years to cook the ideas much better and to present it to the world in a much more mature way. But I wanted it to come out at, during the heated debates surrounding this movement, because I think it's important to showcase to the world what Iranian people inside Iran are doing. But I have to, in defense of myself, however, I must admit that a lot of the artists that are covered in this book are not necessarily from Tehran. They may practice in Tehran. They may have received their education in Tehran, but they're from Kurdish background. They're from the religious city of Mashhad. They're from Shiraz. They're from Kerman. They're from the Turkish regions, Azerbaijan. And when I spoke with these artists, some of them, like, they have apartments, they live in Tehran, their parents, their entire family is in back in their home region. But when I spoke with these people, I was very, very conscious of the fact that this is a Kurdish person, for example. So I wanted them to talk to me from their Kurdish background and experience too. And one takeaway from all of these was that, at least during that time when I was conducting these interviews, people did not care so much about their ethnicity. They were not there to make their ethnic background and ethnicity bold. They wanted to create one voice and to stand for one cause, and therefore they put aside all of these other issues in order to be the same voice and to just support the movement as much as they could and in the best way they could.
Yeah, thank you so much. Allow me to ask you one final question. It's again a combination of a few questions. I apologize if it makes the questions a little bit more complex. I'm trying to cover as much as I can. Well, 3 years after Zandagi Azadi, with all the transformations it brought, what kind of like have you observed in artists' practices inside Iran and the diaspora, like a continuation in this kind of transformations, like whether formal, thematic, strategic, and also from your perspective, are there what are the mechanisms that link these significant political shifts to the emergence of new art movements? Like I'm like trying to actually combine a few questions here, but I think the focus here would be the politics of art here. Like, how do these transformations are like political in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, the question about artistic movements and the directions of the art, our political voices come and go, but they never completely disappear. Sometimes they become more subtle, sometimes they appear in the margins, in the underground, but they do have their influences. Even if you look at the landscape of American art, the heavy weight of politics was in American art during the Vietnam War, for example, or the civil rights movement. Right now, I can't just pinpoint a form or a movement in art, in the American art scenes, that boldly embodies a political language. It's kind of scattered right now. So likewise, Iran's art landscape is like that too. And we have to accept this reality because, sometimes people complain and say, oh, so-and-so art project that you mentioned actually is funded by some wealthy entrepreneurs. So what about the difference between that and somebody who did something on the sidewalks and put their lives in danger? I would say to that question that both kinds of art are important for Iran right now. Art has the capacity to speak the language of politics in a very subtle way, and therefore it's a very safe medium for people to practice politics in. Because, if you're a journalist, and you write in a very clear language about some of your political thoughts, you might get arrested and so on and so forth. But if you make, a film that is just about the movement of your body on the street, you may be questioned as to why you're moving your arms in such a weird way. But then your language is not very clear there. So this kind of opacity that I alluded to in my paper, this kind of desire to say what you want to say, but not in a direct language, is actually a very helpful thing in Iran. And I think that has moved the direction of the intellectual art circles of Iran to the place that we see today. And I think it's very successful. And I try to showcase this success everywhere I go, in different talks that I give, even in my classrooms, when I talk to students, when I talk to colleagues, because sometimes there is this assumption that because Iran is kind of isolated because of the sanctions and because of the difficulty of traveling to Iran, or people traveling outside Iran, that Iranian art is irrelevant. But I say, actually, no. It is one of the most relevant art practices in our world today, especially in this world that is becoming increasingly less secure because of AI and because of the different modes of surveillance. And I think Iranians have developed different tactiques that can be useful for others to learn from.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pamela Jan. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot myself. I think we could cover most of the questions and comments, but we'll make sure that you receive all of them, and so that you can think about them later as well. Thank you. Thank you, Alireza Jan.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Karimi for once again gracing us with today's incredible talk on her latest powerful and important book, Women, Art, Freedom. Please note that the book is now out and may be purchased via the link in the chat that we shared with you earlier, and as well as on farhang.org or through any of your favorite online booksellers. Special thanks to Dr. Farshad Sombolder for moderating today's talk, and especially to Dr. Janet Afari and the entire team at UC Santa Barbara for organizing this annual lecture series with Farhang Foundation. Today's talk was recorded and will be made available on farhang.org, as well as on our YouTube and Facebook channels in the coming weeks. As always, we invite you to visit farhang.org for all our latest upcoming events, performances, talks, and programs. We thank you all for joining us from all over the globe and for spending a few hours of your Saturday with us. And we look forward to welcoming you again next. Pamela Jan, thank you so much. It was an honor to have you. And thank you, Farshad Jan.
Thank you.
Until then, we bid you farewell. Goodbye.